how do I survive in this environment? Now, if I don't have a solution for my emotional or survival fears or problems, what I do is I activate my stress response system, which is only fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Welcome to Creating Wellness Moments, the podcast where we dive into the depths of the human psyche, self-discovery, and personal growth. I'm Calvin Wong, your host and fellow explorer on this journey towards mental well-being. Join me as we uncover inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical tips to cultivate a healthier and happier life. Get ready to embark on a transformative experience, one episode at a time. Let's create wellness moments together. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creating Wellness Moments. So today we've got a special guest on the podcast. Meet Cornelia Dahinten. She's a expert in relationships and attachment. So she's actually on a mission where she helps people build their conscious connection as well as build authentic relationships in their lives. She's all about exploring attachment patterns, making shifts, and providing insights into areas such as like cross-cultural relationships, parenting, and even corporate dynamics. So Cornelia, thank you so much for coming on the show and talk about your work.
Thanks for having me, Calvin.
Yeah. Just to get started, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your company and how that got formed and the inspiration behind it.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually started originally as a hypnotherapist. So that's almost 20 years ago now. And when I had my first child, I kind of got into contact with attachment and parenting strategies and things like that. And as a hypnotherapist, a lot of these parenting strategies that I was confronted with just didn't sit very well with me. And I was thinking like, somehow these are the kind of moments that I'm going back to, because as a hypnotherapist, you do a lot of work on inner child patterns. So I started to research into it. And at the time, it was really new knowledge. That was in 2006. All of the things and how does the brain develop, how do synaptic connections develop, what is the influence of the parent? That was really new knowledge. And there was a psychologist in London who wrote a book about that, on how parenting actually influences the brain. So I got super hooked on that and really researched into that. And the doula for my second baby then asked me to do a parenting class for her. And I said, come on, I don't know anything about parenting. I just have this little baby. My knowledge is purely theoretical. And she said, no, but nobody knows about this. So she was actually really torturing me for a long time until I said, okay, I do the parenting class for you. And the approach was really for parents to understand how their parenting would influence the brain, how to figure out what is a positive input and what would be a negative input, and what are the things that I actually want to create. So the parenting class was all shaped about like kind of, well, who do you want to be in this relationship building creation? And then after a while, I realized people could not really put into practice what I was teaching them because of their own history that they brought. So I did a coaching degree that was very attachment focused. Then I realized, somehow the couple can't really figure out a good groove. And I need to find something that brings them together so that they can really form this family vision together. So I trained as a couples therapist as well. And that was also very developmentally focused and very attachment focused. So my whole journey really turned towards more and more to attachment and bonding. And I started to understand that this whole parenting just really is something that we've got programmed when we were children, that has been programmed many generations before. And if we want to change something, we really need to look at a much deeper level. So I got really hooked into that then. So my focus went into, when I did somatic trainings and trainings on how to release trauma in trauma bonds, trauma attachment, and how does trauma affect us, and how does attachment and bonding, the way we receive it, actually affect the way we stand up in the world. And this is how I'm actually focusing on things now. That's why my company is called Conscious Connections Consultancy. It's really about understanding how does the way I attach to people, to things, to my life, to myself, affect the way I am creating the life I'm living in. And that could be anything. That could be my own experience sitting on my own in a room. And that could be my relationship to my children, my relationship to my friends, my relationship to my partner, my relationship to the rest of the family, and the way I show up in work, and how teams build, how teams create. So it's really something that I think is almost like the blood of the life that we live. So as you see, I'm quite passionate about the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. It sounds like the mission kind of found you, and in that sense, we were
Yes.
you were talking a little bit about how, you know, the inner child, and we pass on like through epigenetics some of these traits that we have, along with the inner child that we might have due to some traumas, right? And
Yeah.
in terms of that, how would you I like the spin, or not so much a spin, but the approach that you've taken in terms of how the attachment theory, right? That's not something I've typically heard before. And can you just dive a little bit deeper into that and how that affects our daily life, as you mentioned, right? But perhaps the way that we might not see it typically.
Yeah. So you mentioned the epigenetic element, which I'm going to pause for a bit and come back to in a minute, and maybe start with explaining how does attachment patterns, or how does my attachment experience really affect my daily life. So when you're born, the only survival option that you have is to have attachment with other humans. So actually, there have been, unfortunately, very sad and tragic research in Russia, but it is something that we can refer to, in orphanages where children did not have any human contact and they died. So it's not just like a nice to have, or let's be nice to our babies. It's actually a survival need. So human babies do need physical contact, mental contact, and attachment, which means you see me, you care for me, you want me to be with you, right? That's what attachment really means. So another human who kind of welcomes me into this world, wanting me there. That's kind of what we need for a healthy psyche. So now imagine that most children actually don't grow up the way we are supposed to grow up. We are not living very human specific anymore. So the human specific life is we're born into a tribe. Like the hunter-gatherers actually had the healthiest human need meeting environment that we can think of, which is quite proven today. So we're born into a tribe. There's a tribe that stays relatively the same. I mean, some people are born and some people die, but in general, it stays the same. The environment stays pretty much the same. So the human baby is born and greeted by the tribe and formed by the tribe. So basically what's happening is that the environment teaches baby, how do I survive in this context, in this environment? In fact, the brain is a pretty open space in terms of which problem solving can we use for the problems that we have. So you have the lower brain regions, which are the brain stem and the limbic system, so the emotional and the survival part of the brain. And you have the rational part of the brain, the neocortex. And the neocortex, the rational part of the brain, and the lower brain regions are not very connected at birth, which basically means we don't have solutions for our problems. So now the question is, how do we form synaptic connections? How do we know what to do if we have an emotional or survival problem? Because really there are no other problems, right? And the answer is that our environment teaches us by responding. So I have a problem. My environment responds, which is the people, mostly the adults around me. They respond, and that gives electrical impulses through my senses into my brain. Hungry, mother comes, feeds me, and there is a solution to my problem. So now it functions the same way for every other problem that we have. So I'm feeling scared. Somebody comes and soothes me or not. So it's really about, how do I survive in this environment? Now, if I don't have a solution for for my emotional or survival fears or problems, what I do is I activate my stress response system, which is only fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Right? Fawning is something that's a little bit less known. It's basically, I'm trying to be someone that you like, so you start caring for me. Right? So the attachment style is, what do I need to do to get your love, to get your attention, to make you friendly towards me, and to survive in this environment? Now, if I'm securely attached, I know that people will care for me, that people will be there who look friendly at me. But there are also other attachment styles, like anxious. I'm always worried that I'll lose my attachment. Or avoidant, I'm always worried that my attachment doesn't feel good, so I'm trying to avoid my attachments. Or there is a more distractive or disoriented attachment style, which is neither here nor there, kind of constantly not knowing what is what can I rely upon, right? Which is disorganized. So most people have some sort of a secure attachment style, but we don't usually have the same attachment style to every areas of our life, right? So we can have some streams or some streets of anxious attachment and some of avoidant attachment, and we're not 100% always one or the other. Okay, why is it important? Can you still follow me, Calvin?
Yeah.
Am I still making sense? Okay.
Yeah, maybe I could chime in a little bit before we get a little bit further. Yeah, the things that really stuck out to me was when you talked about the tribe and how you have certain attachments, ways of environment, SOPs, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And that in terms of the modern society, even though we have such freedom, I think a part of us losing our way in terms of having this type of attachment, and why we have maybe some trauma or feelings of being lost, is because there is no kind of core tribe and way of life anymore, right?
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I totally agree. And the problem is that we more and more attach to things that are actually unhealthy, like screens, video games. It's just kind of the numbing and the distraction of our actual emotions. So or peer attachments. A lot of children start to peer attach rather than attaching to their children. So Gordon Neufeld, which is a very well-known neurologist, talks a lot about that, and I think Gabor Mate also talks about that. I think they wrote a book together on peer attachment. So the not being healthily attached to what you should actually be attached to for your psychology, for the psyche to develop in a healthy way. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, for sure. And then the second thing that really stuck out to me was you talked about the fight, flight, flee, and fawn response. And we don't typically talk about the fawn response. And you said it's more like being the way that you think your peer or society wants you to be. And in that sense, I think now it's more commonly used as a masking mechanism versus using the term fawn. I would say if I look back at my own life, I would be guilty of that in some scenarios as well.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
See, it's interesting that you say I would be guilty of that. That's an interesting wording, right? Because it's actually a protective mode. So I think when I work with my clients, one of the most important things that I always try to help them understand is like, look, the behavior that you choose to, or that you chose as a child to use to protect you from the pain of attachment is not your fault. It was actually your survival mechanism, right? It made you survive that environment. So it's actually learning how to be grateful to that part of you that chose to be that fawning personality, right? Because it helped you survive.
Yeah, for sure. Even just pointing this out actually got a pretty good insight, because how we choose words, especially if it's not scripted, really gives a good insight of how we perceive certain scenarios or things that happen, right? And then you picked up on the way that I use the word guilty versus protection, right? And that gives some insight in terms of how I actually personally feel about being in that fawn response.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you may continue. There was actually a lot to take in, so.
Yeah. Okay, where do I continue? So I was just explaining on how we, like an attachment style, is evolving through the interaction, or what would be a healthy attachment style, right? Or how is it evolving? Now, depending on how I learned to protect myself, maybe, or how to thrive with the relationships around me, it's almost like a computer program, right? Like the hard drive that's installed in my life. So we create, and the human brain is pattern seeking. We create patterns of interpreting the world, and the major patterns are really formed in the first 7 years. I have a lot of clients who then say, oh, do we really have to go back to childhood? Really? Is it again because of something happened in childhood? Well, see, it's this seed, the program that we used to survive and to decipher the world and to understand how do we make it in this world. We don't lose that program if we can rewrite it together, but we really need to rewrite that program and actually help you to find a new program that we can install instead of that, or basically like a new muscle to strengthen instead of the old muscle that was very strong. That doesn't mean we're going to blame our parents. It doesn't mean they've done something wrong. It just means we acknowledge that in this environment, there was a certain survival mechanism that was created to actually just help me with a certain situation. And, parents come from parenting as well. They have their own attachment hurts and their own attachment situation, their own attachment programs. And all of the parents that I have ever met are trying to do their best. Even if by objective standards they're doing very poorly, they are still trying to do their best. They may be coming very hurt into this relationship. They may be being very protective about their emotions and their attachment. So when I'm talking about childhood and things that we can explain from inner child wounds and attachment, I'm never looking to blame. I'm just trying to understand what created certain behaviors that will make you behave in a certain way in the life that you're living. And one of the major questions I always look for, are you passively just floating on these old patterns? Or can we actually actively create the life you want, right? Because that's really the goal. The goal is that people learn how to actively create the life that they want and the vision that they have, rather than just flowing passively, being thrown around by whatever comes at them.
Right, for sure. So when you talk about the inner child, is this what you mean in terms of between the ages of 0 and 7, we build this programming, and this programming is what you refer to as the inner child, or?
Yeah, so the inner child really is a very neurological process. The inner child process is a story that we can use with hypnotic tools that activate different areas of the brain. So we activate through the image of the inner child, we activate the emotional or the survival part of the brain. And then we bring in the adult and that image activates the rational part of the brain, the neocortex. And usually when we're just talking like that, you can't possibly activate both parts of the brain, especially not when you have an inner child wound there, because it always cuts off access to your rational part of the brain, because you're in a stress response, and then you lose access to your neocortex, to the rational part of the brain, and you're going into your stress response, which is all fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So through the image of your adult self, as kind of a time travel, we can activate that part of the brain, right? So it's not a spiritual kind of practice. It's actually a neurological sort of trick that we use from hypnotherapy that helps us to activate the different parts of the brain. And then we create an interaction of these two different parts of the brain, which is now your adult self and your inner child self, that is basically just an area in the brain, an emotion that we can evoke with the image of the inner child. And in that interaction, we create a synaptic connection building as if you had this input as a child when you didn't have it because there was no empathic witness with you who could give it to you at the time. Now, when you are a child, the brain is a lot more plastic than it is now. But the brain stays plastic. We still have brain plasticity. So it still works. It just needs a bit of repetition. And I like working with mantras and sentences and colors and things that help the brain to train that new muscle.
Yeah, that's extremely intriguing what you just talked about. So being able to, how do you begin to link these two parts of the brain when we're typically separating them when we try to recall these traumatic responses or past negative experiences?
So usually I go through the body. The main gateway to emotions that are cut off from the rational part of the brain are in the body. So the body keeps the score is one of the books that I think most people should read. Have you read it? Do you know it?
I know the book. I haven't read it though.
Yeah, it's a really good book. But I mean, just the title itself is very telling, and it's like that. Your body keeps the score. Because when you have we need to remember that an emotion is a sensation in the body that the mind is trying to make sense of. Now, so we have a sensation in the body, and if the mind can't make sense of it, it kind of sticks in the body. We can't release the energy that is formed by it, right? So when you think of a stress that enters the body because of an experience, and there's no one to help us process, it just gets stuck, right? It doesn't move. If I have an empathic witness with me who will say, it's gonna be okay, I'm here with you, don't worry, I'll look out for you, someone who is there, then I can relax into that and process and integrate whatever happens to me. And somebody will maybe even find words that they will play back at me to explain to me what happened. So my story, it's getting congruent. This is all of the things that an empathic witness would do. That helps the psyche and the body to integrate and to connect in that experience. So we build synaptic connections. So the brain architecture learns how to deal with an emotion like that. Now, if I don't have an empathic witness, if I either have somebody who doesn't realize I'm not feeling well, who doesn't realize that happened to me, or who denies that this is what happened to me, like a narcissistic parent who would gaslight their children, or a child who goes to their caretaker to tell them that they have been abused. And they say, oh, nonsense, that never happened, because they find it very hard to believe. These are extreme examples, but this can happen in very small things, like a child falling, hurting themselves very badly, or getting scared, and somebody telling them, oh, that's nothing. It's basically a very similar experience, just on a much smaller scale, obviously. But how will this child learn how to digest, process, and integrate that feeling? How will they know that actually when I hurt, it will be okay again with feeling through it, because that is what is necessary to really digest the feeling. And if we don't do that, the feelings stay in the body. Now, when people come to me and we go through a process and I feel like, oh, there's an emotion that isn't coming from the adult self, right? That's an emotion that feels much younger or creates action or reaction rather than a rational process, then I go through the body. So I'd ask questions like, where in your body do you feel that? Now, some people can feel emotions in their body. Then I'm already I can start to work. If I get the answer, I don't know, then we have to start with people actually starting to feel their bodies again. I need to help them to re-feel their bodies. So we do a lot of physical exercises, actually, like tapping or boxing the shins and things like that, just helping people to feel their bodies again, to come back. Because a lot of people have learned that it's not safe to be in their bodies. It's constantly overwhelming, right? So if they can't feel it, then we need to do that work first. But if they can feel it, you can ask questions to just have the mind really grasp that feeling. Things like, if it had a color, what color would it have? Where in your body is it? What does it, if that feeling could talk, what would it say? If the feeling had a temperature, what would it be, cold or warm? Just to kind of be getting into contact with that area of the body that's showing up. And that's a pretty good line into the feeling. And then we can go deeper in there. And at one point you ask, how old do you feel in this feeling?
That's
and then we work with it.
Hey there, amazing listeners. Before we dive deeper in today's insightful conversation, I want to take a quick moment to give a shout out to the driving force behind this podcast, my very own mental health focused creative production agency, Calvin Wong Media. As you know, creating wellness moments is all about exploring the depths of the human psyche and fostering personal growth. And guess what? It would not be possible if it were not for Calvin Wong Media. We conceptualize, humanize, and bring your story to life using unique storytelling techniques that engages the audience. So, the next time you're inspired by an episode or find yourself engaged in a thought-provoking conversation here, remember, that's the result of the support of Calvin Wong Media and its lovely kinds. If you're looking to amplify your message, tell your story with authenticity, and connect with your audience on a deeper level, reach out to us at calvinwongmedia.com. Now back to the conversation on creating wellness moments. That's a very in-depth process, and it's something that's really stuck out to me is how you talked about we don't want to be in our body almost. We're so trapped in our mind, right? And especially in modern society, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to have this kind of individualism versus the community mindset, right? We tend to have the expectation that everyone just go do their job and everyone's expected to perform without interacting each other, and somehow it's all gonna magically meld together, right?
Yeah, but there's such a misconception in that, right? And I feel that this is a bit of we're kind of going for the wrong story. And that story has been told ever since we separated the mind and the body. When people talk about the mind and the body being two separate things, which is just total nonsense. And the idea of being, when you are stuck in the mind, you're logical, and then that is all the things which make sense. When really, the less contact you have to your body, the less you feel where your emotions are showing up, the less you are able to actually change them. So the body really is the tool to change your experience. It's not in the mind. The mind, if we're constantly in the mind, we go into overthinking. We go into being stressed because the answer isn't there. We cannot think ourselves out of a problem. And so being stuck in the mind, I feel is a response to the story that we have been told and that got us really into a troubled situation because the answer is in the body and not in the mind. We don't have to believe every thought that we're thinking. You said something about the individualism and losing contact to communities, which I think is a very, very crucial point, because that as well is like a story that we have been believing that is wrong. We cannot be more successful individually. I think it's an illusion to think. I mean, of course, we are individuals on a big basis, but that doesn't mean that we can deny that we are part of a big of a big community, and we cannot deny that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you pointed out the techniques such as tapping, I noticed that you're doing what I've known is called the butterfly hug. And
Yes.
yeah, and what I've learned was it actually gets your parasympathetic nervous system involved. Are you able to maybe explain what the parasympathetic nervous system is and how this tapping will actually reduce the anxiety or stress that you may have?
So you have basically two gears of the nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the stress response. So, and the parasympathetic is the relaxed response. I think one of the very important things for healing is to understand what happens in the stress response. The stress response is when the body prepares or is ready to fight, flight, or freeze. It's a biological response to helping us with natural threats, like a bear, right? So there's a bear in front of you. What the hell do? You can try to fight the bear. Well, I wouldn't try to fight the bear, but some people might. So you can run away and hide, or you can pretend that you're dead, or you can try to befriend the bear, right? But okay, so depending on your history and the patterns that you do, your nervous system will get into one or the other of these gears. But what the gears have in common is the body, the physical response to it. The heart rate goes up, the breathing increases, becomes shallow and very fast. The muscles tense up, digestion shuts down. Your entire system prepares for this incredible act of rescuing yourself. Now imagine that you got into this gear when you were little and you never stopped. What do you think will happen? Chronic disease, right? So, and that is what happens with attachment trauma, really. We get into this gear of rescuing our life, and the body's doing all of these things, and we never get out of it. So the way to get out of it is that we stop thinking about what happened, but to actually pay attention to our body, to the fascia, to the muscles, to the breathing, to the digestion, and to actually calm down the nervous system and switch from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system gear. Now, there is vagus nerve activation that really helps. The vagus nerve is the biggest nerve we have. It connects the brain to all of our organs. We want the vagus nerve to be activated to tell all of our organs, hey, don't worry, there's no need to be in the sympathetic nervous system gear anymore. We can shift to gear parasympathetic, right? So with the nervous system activation, that's what I work with a lot. You can activate it with some eye exercises, with humming, like doing things like that activates here. We can do like a stretching, like a fascia stretch. These are all things that I teach my clients. And we do diagonal brain activation. That's also something that we use in EMDR, which is another trauma process that is very effective that I work with. And just like exercises that are very simple to do at home, that we can do on a regular basis, that we combine with breathing, just many different puzzles that helps that system to shift gear. And for people who just had something that happened, who usually are not in the sympathetic nervous system, who usually quite all right, this works very quickly. For people who have been in the stress mode for decades, this takes a little bit longer. It takes a little bit more dedication. But the incredible moment when you see that people start to let go and relax and start to be able to look at a vision of creating something different is really beautiful. And it does work. It does work, but it needs body involvement.
Yeah, absolutely. You painted a very powerful scenario that maybe most of us has not really thought about, how we had this traumatic scenario in our childhood and we've been living in stress since then for the whole life and not realize it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's because for people, the attachment experience that they have with their primary caretakers is their normal, right? So let's say you grow up in a household with a mother who is chronically stressed and who yells, and maybe a father who switches himself up and avoids and maybe isn't present very much, which then is a bit of a cycle, right? So because that probably makes the mom more stressed, and the more stressed the mom is, the more avoidant the father is. So maybe that's your dynamic that you grow up in. And for you, that's your normal. That's what normal feels like. But you're constantly in a stress mode. You're constantly worried. Will she yell? Is she okay? Why is he not there? You know, that the child doesn't consciously worry about this, but subconsciously it's a constant taxing out of how can I be safe in this? How can I make this more safe? And that is very stressful, very energy sucking, and actually takes the focus away from learning who I am. And that's also very stressful because I can never be who I am. I always have to then focus on other people. This experience isn't only my norm, it also creates the blueprint for all of the other relationships that I'm going to live. So I'm actually going to look for people who feel the same, who feel like my mom or my dad, where this environment feels similar, because I will be drawn to feeling at home by looking out for feeling the same way again, which is very interesting to see, because people always think they marry somebody or get into a deep relationship with someone who is exactly the opposite of their experience. And then it turns out once the shadow side comes out, oh no, I feel exactly the same again, right? And then it's actually a big healing opportunity when that happens. I always feel that is a gift.
Yeah, from our conversation, there are so many connections that are starting to click in my brain, especially when you talked about why you do all these exercises, being like aware of your body and maybe eye movement and so on and so forth. And one thing that stuck out to me is a lot of people talk about how the benefits of meditation, for example, and they don't really go too in depth of actually why. And some of the things we uncovered today from our conversation, personally for me, is during that meditative state, we're a lot, maybe not the goal, but being more aware of your body and what you're feeling within your body and taking that step back away from the mind is, at least for me, I think one of the key takeaways of why we might do meditation. Yeah. But I did have maybe like one more question before we take off. I do love conversing with you though.
Let me say one thing about meditation, because I feel that a lot of people, especially with attachment trauma, they try to do meditation because they think it's going to be good for them and they don't manage, and then they feel like failures. Meditation is great for some people, but for some others it's not great. Especially people who live in constant hypervigilance, the sympathetic part of the nervous system. Sometimes meditation is not the right thing. They maybe need it. So if you can't do meditation, try to start breath work instead, because it is something where you can count, which is something that, isn't leaving your mind so freely. You can use it in a little bit more of a controlled way, which is easier for some people, just as a side note.
No, I think that's actually very important, because I have heard people that say, meditation is not for me. And that might be a reason why. So, yeah, in terms of, I did want to know two things. One would be, does everyone have trauma? And second one would be, what are maybe some small actionable tips that we all could do to start having better attachment programs and being more constructive in our life?
So first, the question, does everyone have trauma? See, I think yes, everybody has some sort of trauma. Unfortunately, I feel the word trauma covers far too much to actually be precise here. And we need to give trauma the definition, getting out of the understanding of shock trauma, and really understand that trauma is a feeling of overwhelm in a moment where there was no empathic witness that helped me process. And these can be very small and tiny moments. It can be something that is very repetitive, and because of that causes an overwhelm, right? So I think, yes, everybody has trauma if we define it this way, and we don't have another word. Tips. So to improve your attachment, is that the question?
Yes, improve our attachment, correct.
Yeah. So I think that when you start, for attachment, you always need to start with yourself. To actually ask yourself, how do I feel with myself? Do I actually like myself? What is the talk that I get up here when I'm feeling triggered, when I'm feeling stressed, when I'm feeling whatever you're feeling, right? What is the relationship that I have with myself? What do I feel other people are? What's the pattern that I can see? And when I get triggered, and triggered means I don't know what to do, I'm getting really stressed, and whatever people do in fight, flight, or freeze mode or fawn, pause. Take your view away from the other person. Pause and feel your body. And if you cannot feel your body, you need to start doing body work, yoga, just feeling your body, jumping, dancing, and feeling your body, just going everywhere in your body, or contact me or some other practitioner to help you feel your body. But if you feel your body, pause, feel your body, and just see, what do I need in this feeling? What do I need in this feeling that I can provide? You know, the sentence of "you made me feel" is always nonsense. People cannot make you feel anything. You feel while somebody else does, right? If you pull a funny face, that makes me feel is always wrong, right? If you pull a funny face, then I feel that makes more sense, right? That has to do with me though, because some other people may not react to it, right? So the best tip for attachment style awareness and getting out of reactivity is to stop, pause, feel your body, and see what is it that you need in that feeling. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And I think that's something that everyone can do. And so thank you so much, Cornelia, for coming on the show and sharing your work. I could really tell that you're so passionate about it. And if you did want to get involved in working with Cornelia, I will leave all her socials and website down below. And thank you so much for coming on the show, and let's create more wellness moments together.
Thanks so much, Cal. It was a pleasure.